It's good to be in the house of the Lord this morning. Now, this morning I'm starting off from the Old Testament. I'm slightly taking a verse out of context and building upon it. The context that I'm using it in is really sort of drove my way of thinking. I'm in Exodus and looking at some of the Mosaic and Levitical law. And it's one of those things that really, when you look at some of these things, that gets you kind of thinking. Now, more often than not, when we mention the law, the main thing that comes to mind for most people is the fact that we have the 10 Commandments. There are over 600 commandments. We just oftentimes think of the 10 that Moses was given on top of the mountain and that he brings down to the children of Israel. Those are 10, but there are over 600 different commandments given. Now, some of these are about their dietary habits of, well, if it chews the cud and if it's split of the hoof, birds of the air, different types of things that they were to either avoid eating or things that they could eat. Now, being able to look back at that from current historical standpoint to then, we can understand that God was really taking care of the people of Israel with these dietary things, because a lot of the things that were being considered unclean, things like chicken, really bad for salmonella if not handled properly. And even though chicken is pretty much a staple of our diet today, back then, due to the inability to be able to properly handle the food, salmonella and death. With a lot of the animals like pork back then, well, they were fed anything and everything, very disease-ridden animals. So we understand why there were these dietary laws. Then there were also civil laws. Now, if this happens, you have to do this. If you do this to your brother, you're off, or have to do this for recompensation. And it's one of these that's caught my attention and that I'm building on this morning. It's in Exodus chapter 22 and verse 6. If a fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes so that the stacked grain or the standing grain of the field itself is consumed, he who started the fire shall surely make restitution. Okay, where am I going with this? Probably the first thing that's coming to mind right now. God has given some pretty clear commandments. If you're doing something that starts a fire and it spreads into your neighbor's field, you're going to have to make restitution for the things you've destroyed. Now, like I said, we've got some pretty clear civil laws. And no, I'm not going to reinforce the civil law out of the Mosaic law to you. The point I'm drawing out of this, what if the fire that you start in someone else is a fire of lust, a fire of maybe something that sets forth thievery, something that sets forth and causes your brother to sin? This is something that's very real and happens among us and among believers, among people. We occasionally find ourselves doing things in a way that leads our brothers to stumble, gives them trouble along the way. One of my favorite quotes from Paul is, "If eating meat causes my brother to stumble, I will eat meat no more." And Paul's talking about how we have the liberty that if it's not bothering our conscience to be able to, we understand that the meat that was offered at a temple is nothing to that temple and is something that can be consumed. But it was part of ritual at that time that it was considered honoring the God that it was sacrificed to eat of the meat. We know that that's not the case. But Paul says, if doing so causes my brother to stumble, well, I'll just avoid eating meat altogether. To avoid causing people to stumble. Because, all right, now let's stop and think. If God is concerned enough to say, if you burn some of your brother's crops, that restitution is going to be necessary. What's going to happen if you cause your brother's soul to burn? What's going to happen if you cause someone to go astray? There are two verses I'll be looking at next, Matthew 18:6 and Luke 17:2. And whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. And Luke 17:2. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea, that he would be caused one of these little ones to stumble. Pretty much the same thing being said. What you're doing, if your life is causing someone to stumble, if you are leading someone astray through your life, it would be better for a millstone to be hung around your neck and to be tossed in the sea. No, I actually had to stop and look. What is a millstone? I know that, of course, in a mill they grind the wheat with one stone against another. Never really realized the size. Of course, a mill required something more than just a human to move that stone. There are two basic stones in the grinding process. You've got a base stone, which is a large flat stone, and then a rounded stone that actually rolls across the top. Which one's being referred to as the millstone, I'm not sure, but either way, it's going to be a problem for you, because the one that's going around the top and doing the rolling, average weight of it was about 130 pounds. Average weight of the base stone is generally 160 plus pounds. In other words, you got one of those hung around your neck, even if you're an Olympic swimmer, you're not going to be able to swim with it. Now in this we can also see some comparisons in the imagery that's being used here. It's better to have something heavy hung around your neck that's going to drag you down into the depths. If you are doing things in your life that's causing somebody else to stumble, here's something around their neck that's dragging them down. Now we say, well, what can be going on that we're causing people to stumble? This is where that self-evaluation at times can become so important and so vital. Understanding at times even the people that we are dealing with and are around. And I know it's not necessarily the greatest idea, but it's one of those things also, there is avoiding sin, and then there is avoiding the appearance of sin. Just because we know something isn't wrong, just because we know it's okay to do it, doesn't mean that somebody looking at it from the outside really understands what they're seeing. And that in them seeing us do something, they misconstrue it and believe, well, if they're doing this and they're a Christian, then it must be okay for me to do it. My classic example that I always like to pull out here is going to a bar. Regardless of your reasoning, people see you go into a bar, they're immediately going to believe that you're given to high drink and excess, that you condone the activities that are going on in the bar, and various other possibilities. Now, granted, I've heard some people say that, well, I go to a bar to try and witness to people. I've yet to see a person be able to be an effective witness inside of a bar. One of the things about being a Christian witness, you have to be going where God's called you to and where people are going to be receptive to it. If a person's not ready to be receptive, you can talk till you're blue in the face. You can quote them every passage of Scripture. You can preach fire and brimstone, but if they're not prepared to be receptive, it's going to do you no good. And generally the type of people that you'll be trying to witness to in a bar, odds are they're going to be aggressive when approached, because you're going to be condemning them for what they're doing at the moment. Which again, discretion is something that comes with Christian age. Sometimes a young person with zeal will approach things without that discretion. So, discretion is something we as Christians always need. But if you cause your brother to stumble, it's better for you to be tossed in the sea and drowned. Now, it's one of those things, I keep looking at that and saying, God has such clear, well, if we've done this, then we need to do this to make restitution when we're looking at the Old Testament. Well, the New Testament's telling us if we create those fires that lead to lust, passion, cause our brother to do something that's sinful and to fall away, we lead them astray, there will be a restitution and punishment due us. It's something to think about. When I think about that, it really makes me want to stop and look at my life and really scrutinize the things I'm doing to make sure that the things I'm doing can't be taken out of context and misconstrued to lead somebody else astray. Now, there's a second part to this sermon. Of course, I've been talking about, well, what if we're leading somebody astray? Now, the second part is, what if we're the person on the other side? We've got somebody that we're constantly around that's creating problems in our lives. Matthew 5, that's where I would like to flip to now. Verses 29 to 30. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of your parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of your parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, if you've got somebody in your life that's constantly leading you astray, that's constantly being a stumbling block in your life. Now, I've again heard the reason why we keep this person in our life because we're trying to be a witness to them, we're trying to be an example to them. But I tell you this, if they are making you stumble and they are leading you astray, you're not being a witness to them, they're being a witness to you. No. Let me say that again. If there's someone that's constantly leading you astray, making you stumble, you're not being a witness to them. They are being a witness to you. Because trust me, they're there, they're watching every time you stumble. They're watching every time they lead you astray. They're saying, well, why should I be a Christian? He's no better than I am. Now, I'm not saying that we need to separate ourselves from the world. I'm saying at times we find ourselves with a friend that causes us problems, that wants to lead us in a place that we shouldn't go. We find ourselves with someone that is a stumbling block for us, that helps to make us stumble. You know, if you've been an alcoholic, hanging around somebody that's a heavy drinker is not a wise thing to do if you want to stay on the wagon. If you've had some form of addiction, hanging around somebody else that is deep into that addiction, you're going to find yourself right back in it. So we need to watch what we do. Because Proverbs 27:17 pretty much sums up my sentiment here. Iron sharpens iron, so man sharpens another. You want to sharpen a sword, sharpen a knife, you use a sharpening stone to take it against, so that you remove a little bit of it, and it places, well, gives you a sharper edge. Eats away at the steel of the blade. Now, when you've got two people that come together, you rub together. The question is, which one of you is the sharpening stone? Which one of you is the blade? No, generally as Christians, we like to think we're the ones that's sharpening other people. That we're helping to eat away the parts that don't need to be there so that they can be better prepared. The sad truth of the fact is, at times we're not. Each and every person has their own thing that they're given to. Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh, talks about the sins that so easily beset us. That sin that so easily besets us is different for each and every person. And if you know what the sin is that so easily besets you, and you hang around somebody or you associate with somebody that brings that out in you, then really it's a place you shouldn't be. It goes again to the example of using an alcoholic. That's if you know you have a problem with drinking and you're recovering from it, going to a bar is not the brightest choice you can make. We know what our weaknesses are. We know the people in our life that help build us up. But we also know there are people in our lives that try and tear us down. So we need to watch. We need to be careful. Because just as we need to make sure we're not causing somebody else to stumble, we need to make sure we have somebody in our life, or that we do not have somebody in our life that's making us stumble. Now, that's really all I have to say for this morning. Now, if somebody else